I didn't have the perfect purple embossing powder, so hang with me and learn how to color match your embossing powders to your watercolors. So I've printed the Alex Siberia Hello Summer A2 card panel design on a piece of Saunders Waterford rough watercolor paper. And this is the high white, which means it's a bright white instead of that kind of yellowish cream color. I love the high white color of this. So I'm going to go ahead and watercolor this with my Daniel Smith watercolors, and you can see that I clearly didn't clean my brush. I obviously still have Quinacridone Rose and some yellow on there, but it's no big deal because the whole flower is going to be yellow and Quinacridone Rose. So I'm just using a wet on wet technique. So you can see I have quite a bit of water down there, probably more than what I really need to. And I'm just going to drop in Hansa Yellow Medium into that petal. So Hansa Yellow Medium is the cool yellow in my palette, and I'm going to mix that with Quinacridone Rose, which is a cool pink or red color. So those play really nicely together. I'll also use some Quinacridone Gold in this piece, which is a warm yellow, just to add a little bit of extra interest. I find if you can use 3 colors, it just adds a little more interest. The Quinacridone Gold is a deeper, richer color. So I'll use those on the petals that are behind, not the petals in the forefront. I'm going to skip over the petals and allow some of them to dry. So I don't want to paint petals that are adjacent to each other. Otherwise, the colors will just bleed into each other. Now, if some of that happens, that's totally okay. It's not a big deal. This is just kind of a loose watercolor piece. I'm not going for anything too detailed. But if you don't want your colors to bleed like that, then don't paint next to a wet petal. So I'm using a new watercolor brush today. I'm trying out a new set. This one is from ZenArtSupplies, and it's from the Black Tulip Mixed Shapes for Watercolor set. So this is the number 8 round. It's a little bit larger in diameter. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but it seems to have a few more bristles. It's kind of thicker than the other number 8 round brush that I have been using and has been my favorite for so long. This also has a super pointy tip, which I absolutely love because then I don't have to change my brush to do detail work. I can use the same brush for the whole project. But this is my first time using it, so before I give any more information, I want to use it for a while. But I did want to point out that I'm trying out something new. So I'll just keep dropping in this Quinacridone Rose. I love the look of a wet on wet technique, and as I'm getting more and more of that Quinacridone Rose into the petals up at the top, I realized that my initial petals, I had so much water in those petals that I lost a lot of the Quinacridone Rose. So I will go back and rectify that a little bit later in the painting, and you'll see me add a little bit more Quinacridone Rose and kind of just darken up the pinky peach colors a little bit more. It just adds more depth and interest to the colors and the overall feel. So there you can see that I used the Hansa Yellow Medium on that petal, but here you can see I've changed my mind, and for those petals that are behind, I'm going to start using that Quinacridone Gold. There you can see it's a similar color in this application, but it really is so much richer. You can see it in the swatches that I have up at the top of the screen. It's the second and third color there, the difference between the Hansa Yellow Medium and the Quinacridone Gold. I've changed my palette a little bit. I've gone from 28 colors to 18 colors, and I did that because I'm considering teaching some online watercolor classes, and this palette is more conducive to mixing colors. These colors are better for that. So I recently did a video on why you should paint your background first in some situations with watercolor and with cards, or at the very least have a plan for your background. Now, because this stamp takes up the majority of the A2 card, there's very little space for the background. There's no issue with not painting your background first. Because I'm painting a mostly yellow flower, I decided that what I had in my mind is that I wanted to use purple for the background because it's a complementary color. And I thought that that would just help this kind of like pop off the page. So this flower and the background will take up the entire card. Of course, you can trim it down if you wanted to have some white space left around the edges. Got a few more petals and then we'll move on to the flower center, and I'll use a few different purpley colors for the center as well. If you guys are enjoying this video, be sure to like and subscribe down below. Let me know if you enjoy watercolor too, and if so, what do you like to paint? Are you painting flowers? Are you painting stamps? Are you doing more freehand watercolor like I did in my last video? If you missed that, I'll link that in the top right hand corner. Okay, so for the center of the flower, I'm using Goethite, which is a light brown. It's a pretty neutral brown, a little bit warm, but I would say mostly it's pretty neutral. And it's not too dark, so it's not going to overwhelm any of the areas that you put it. It's a great color for sandy beaches. In fact, I used that on the video that I just referenced, where I recommended painting the background first. And I want to add some dimension to the center, so I've mixed the Goethite with some indigo, a little bit of transparent red oxide, and I'm just building up that color. And now I'm adding some Indian red on the outside, and I'll just continue to build up that color. Now I was thinking that where I wanted to add the embossing powder on this card was to the center of the flower. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the background. So this is Rose of Ultramarine, and you can create this color by mixing Quinacridone Rose and Ultramarine Blue. So if you don't have that color, that's how you can mix it. And so that is a cool red and a warm blue is going to mix this color. And I'm just using, again, it's so nice to have a pointed round brush because you can get into these little crevices without having to switch your brush. It's great for those kind of details in those tight areas. So I'm doing a wet on dry technique. I'm not wetting the paper first, but this brush holds a lot of water, and so I'm able to get quite a bit of pigment and water on the brush. It almost feels like a wet on wet technique, but the paper is dry. So this is my last video as a WOW Design Team member. This is the end of my term, was in June, and I am taking some time off from the design teams to kind of work on my website a little bit more. I want to work on my website, kind of work on my own channels. I'm hoping to come out with some photopolymer stamps and some online classes, and it's just been really hard to focus on that stuff being on design teams, so I'm going to take a little bit of a break. You guys will, I'll still be around though. I'm going to be making my own videos, and of course I'll still guest for WOW and different companies as well, so don't worry about that. I'll still be around and there'll still be content on my channel and whatnot. But this will just give me a little bit more time to be able to focus on kind of, you know, taking my hobby to the next level and making it a little bit more lucrative, kind of coming up with better content for you guys and whatnot, with a little more forethought and planning. So yeah, I wanted to share that with you guys. This has been such a great team. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Okay, so I actually had more purples than I thought I had, but none of them were exactly right. I have Twiggy on the left, which is actually a little bit like Raw Umber Violet, Metalline, Himalayan Musk, and then Sugared Almond. None of these match Quinacridone, or Rose of Ultramarine rather. So I decided that I would try and mix these together. So as I was like looking at Rose of Ultramarine, I knew that I needed some warmth to the purple, so Sugared Almond wasn't going to cut it. That is more of a bluish purple rather than a red purple. And so I thought Metalline Himalaya would get me there, but I also wanted it to be darker than those two colors, which is why I'm adding Twiggy. Now Twiggy is a little bit more of a brownish purplish color. Like I said, it's like that Raw Umber Violet, which is one of my favorites. So I just have a coffee filter here. I'm going to shake this up, make sure that I've got it all mixed together. If you have an empty embossing powder container, which you can get if you buy the WOW Changer set, you'll get some empty containers. You can mix it in there as well. So I have the WOW embossing pen, and I'm just going to fill in these like little tendrils that come off the center. I'm sure those aren't supposed to be purple, you guys, but again, we're not making realistic flowers here. And then I also added some of those little C shapes as well, so that it wouldn't just be the tendrils, but we'd have some of that glitter and sparkle on the very center of the flower as well. So I'll just kind of tap this around. Normally, if it were in my jar, I would just kind of like dump half the jar on and wouldn't have to more gingerly shake this around, but I didn't want to mix too much and then have a ton left over. I'll just get the excess off with a dry paintbrush, and then I'll go ahead and melt this with a preheated heat tool. So remember to heat from behind with your glitter embossing powders. And this looks nice, but I feel like there's not nearly enough of the embossing powder in the center. So I added some more, and I feel like I probably overdid it a little bit. Now, this tiny little container, I got a set of these off Amazon. If I can find the link, I will link it down below. But I got these because when I mix custom colors, sometimes I'll have just a little bit left over. That's perfect for another project. So I don't want to just toss it. But I also don't need the large empty container from Wow. So I just put it in these tiny little containers and hold on to it for next time. And you could label it. I don't usually label it, but you could totally label it with your recipe as well. So this hello die is left over from my last video, and I've inked it up with some embossing ink, and I'm just pouring over the clear embossing powder, and I'll go ahead and heat set that to make it nice and shiny. And I usually just stick my tweezers in the middle of it. If you watch Erica's videos, you know that she sticks hers in the corkboard, which is also a really great idea. So if you haven't checked that out, be sure to check out Erica's videos as part of the design team as well. Make sure you let your embossing powder dry before you pick it up. If you do get a fingerprint in it, just reheat it and it'll take your fingerprint right out of it. You can see that I adhered that to the vellum shadow, and that is the finished card. So I'm not a big fan of goodbyes. It's not goodbye for me. So this is a hello card because I'm not going anywhere. You guys will still see me over on my channel, and I'll be guesting with a number of companies as well. I do want to give a huge amount of thanks to you guys for joining me on all of my videos over the last year and a half, and to the Wow team, both Joe and Miriam and all of the design team members, for such a fabulous experience. Thanks, you guys.